here's where we're at. We've got login working. And if you remember, if the user is successfully able to log in, then what we're going to do is we're going to trigger this if user ID will be in request form. And assuming that the user ID and password are correct, then is valid will return true. And so what we're going to do is return survey. So let's talk a little bit about what survey does. Okay. Well, we're going to write the code for survey now. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to create another @app root, @app, oops, app.root. And we're going to pass in survey. And the methods we're going to pass in are post. The methods that we'll accept are post and get. And now we're going to define survey. The pattern for the survey controller is very similar to the pattern for the login controller, which I like. I like things to follow patterns and act in predictable ways. So we're going to set this error to none. You might have an error at some point, but I don't know. And then we are going to well, let's take a look at the survey page. All right, so that's the results page. That's not very helpful. Okay, so the survey page is going to display the list of books. All right, that's the goal. And then if the user selects a particular book and presses the submit button on the form, we're going to then jump to the results page with the information about the book that was selected. So we have sort of two goals. So one thing we should definitely do, since we're going to need to present the list of books that the user can vote from, is we're going to create a DAO, which is a book DAO, right? So the book DAO contains the collection of books that's supposed to be displayed. So I'm going to say books is equal to DAO.select all. And so select all is going to get me all the books that are stored in the data store. In this instance, the data store is going to be one of those simple. It's going to use the data set framework to store and manage books much more easily than if we were just using a regular file. All right. So the code we want to write here works very similar to the code that we wrote for login. So we're going to check if the book vote has occurred, then, book vote in request form. So if the book vote occurred, then what we're going to do is we're going to store in the session, not the user, but the ISBN number. All right, so session.isbn is equal to request.form vote. All right, and request form.vote will contain the ISBN number of the vote. And just thinking about how my code's written right now, I don't like that. I think that the name ISBN should be stored in the form, and the request form vote here should be request form ISBN. That makes things nice and consistent. So in the HTML for the form, we're going to store the ISBN as the key and the value of the ISBN for the book that was selected as the value. All right, so then we're going to return results. So results is going to be yet another app root. That's the app root or the controller that displays the results page. We're going to write the code for that in just a moment. Okay, else, if the ISBN is not in the request form, well, that means that this is the first time we've been to the survey page, or the users clicked refresh or something, and we don't have a vote yet. So what we want to do is render the template for the survey page. And the template for the survey page is basically a bunch of survey HTML. And we're going to pass in any local variables that might be interesting and useful to that HTML template. And we'll take a look at that in a second. So I'm using the word template and not pure HTML. And that's because the survey page is a little bit different from the login page. The login page displays straight HTML. There's nothing, no special processing or anything like that. We're basically just dumping the HTML that we have stored in the templates directory out to the browser. But here with the survey page, we actually have some special stuff that we need to do. And that's because the survey page does have some generic HTML, but then we have to display each book. All right, and the books are not hard-coded in the HTML. The books are something that are right here, right now, in this books collection, right here, this books list in Python. And somehow we have to get the books that are stored here in this books list in Python. Somehow we have to get that book information into this survey.html page. So how do we do that? Well, let's write some code for the survey.html template. All right, so let's see, book voter, Flask. All right, so in the templates directory, in the book voter Flask file, I already have a survey.html, but it's pre-written and I want to write it with you. So I'm going to call this survey, I'll call it survey class or survey video.html. All right, so the code the HTML that we're going to write here is pretty much standard HTML with a one or two little exceptions. So, right, I'm just going to do your standard doc type HTML, and here's my HTML tag, and here's my body tag, and here's my, let me get some nice indenting here, that's kind of cool, H1, vote for a book. Close H1. All right. And then we're going to create a form. And the ID for the form is going to be form, kind of a boring ID name. The action is going to be, please go to the survey link. Now, I'm not saying survey.html or survey.ps or bookvoter.py or anything like that. I'm just saying the action is survey. And what that means is that in addition to the IP address and the port number, the form will add /survey to the URL when it does the post to go back to the web server. All right. So before we would have said something like this, survey.py. All right. But we're not doing that anymore. We're just going to say survey. And the app root, let's take a look at that. I'll go to the buffer menu. Let's see. The app root right here will connect /survey and that /survey right there to the action that happens on the HTML page for survey. Okay. All right, so there's my form action survey, and method is equal to post. Okay, so that starts my form. Oops, I forgot to put a little close quote there. Okay. Now, in the form, I'm going to have a input type equals submit and an ID equals submit and name equals submit. Everything submit here. And value equals submit. That's my submit button that's going to appear in the form. So my idea here is there'll be a list of books as radio buttons. The user's going to select one of the books and then press submit. Okay, so that's my submit button. Now I'm going to close the form. And I'm going to close the body. I'm going to close the HTML, and I'm almost done. The one thing that's missing here is a little bit of strange code that's not quite Python, but it's not quite HTML, that's going to allow me to list all of the books. That's the piece that's missing here, right? I can't hardcode the books in here because if the data store has new books added to it or books removed from it, I want to be able to see those new books. All right, so here's the piece of code that's not quite HTML and not quite Python. So I just did this really weird thing. I did an open curly brace with a %. This syntax I'm about to write, this is never going to appear in the web browser. It's only something that's set up for the Flask backend to process when it is told to do the render template of the survey.html file. It will encounter this open curly brace %, and it'll say, oh my gosh, this is code that I need to run. Let's start running it. So for book in books. Now you might be saying to yourself, wait a second here, where is this books variable coming from? All right, and hang on to that for a moment and I'll help you figure that out. All right, so for book in books. And then what we're going to do is for each book in books, we're going to set up an input type equals radio, name equals vote. Oh, sorry, we decided the name is going to be ISBN. Name equals ISBN. Value equals. So the value that we're going to have here is we're going to take that book that's in this for loop, for book in books, that book, and we're going to extract the ISBN number of the book. So the way we do that is two open curly braces, book.isbn. So that will take a Python book object, which is extracted from books using this for loop, and it will return the ISBN number of the Python book object. All right, and then we're going to close the radio button, and then we'll get the guts, the information about the book, and that's here. Two curly braces will get us access to that book variable, book.title by book.author. And then we'll display right next to that book.votes, the votes for the book. And then we'll put a little bit of HTML sugar in here and do a /br to get us to the next line. All right, I'll make this just a little bit bigger so it all fits on one line. All right, so the last thing I have to do is I have to end the for loop using this other piece of code. And for. So this isn't quite Python, it's not quite HTML, it's a special syntax that lets you put some basic control structures in your HTML. These control structures are not executed on the front end in the browser, they're executed by the Flask template processing engine. And they will allow us to run a for loop through the books that are in this books list that are in Python. And we can extract information from each book because a book is a book object, and we can extract all of the members of the book. So I'm getting the ISBN number, the title, the author, and the votes. Okay, now how does books, which is the thing that contains the list of books, how does it get into this HTML? How do we get access to it? Well, the way we get access to it is by when we call render template and we pass survey.html, that's the name of the HTML file that the template processor that Flask has will use to examine the HTML file. When we say ** locals open close paren here, that's actually passing in every variable that's been defined inside survey. So error was defined, DAO was defined, and books was defined. So inside survey.html, using that weird sort of like Python, but not exactly, language, we can access any of those variables. So the variable that I was interested in accessing was the books variable. The books variable contains a list of books, and each of the books in the list is a book object. And so I was able to go after and grab those book objects and their attributes and access them and use them to display a list of books. So let's take a look at that whole thing in operation. Okay. So we'll start up book voter. Okay, give us a chance to start. Oops, I started that wrong. I used Python 3. All right. And now we'll go over to here and we'll log in. Bob CS Rocks 55. And now we see a list of the books. All right. So this code right here, let's do a view page source. Oh, that's interesting. Let's try that again. Oh, wow. Let's just do inspect then. We should be able to do that. And make that bigger. And see if we can make this a little bit bigger. So there's the form. So the code that appears here after that form ID equals form action equals survey method equals post, the code that appears here, these input types and the break and all that stuff, all of this stuff was generated by this for loop. Let's go back and look at that for loop again. So it was all generated by this for loop. I'm using a slightly different editor, which is coloring things differently. And I noticed that votes there, because I changed it in our example. I'm going to change this back to ISBN. Okay. All right, cool. So that takes care of the description of how survey works. And so now what I want to do is I want to talk about how results work. So let's bring up bookvoter.py, the actual one that I'm using for this program, instead of writing it from scratch, because things are moving along quickly enough that I think we can just start looking at code. Oops. Okay, so here's the full-blown set of code. There's the login route that we talked about. Here is the app route that we talked about for survey with some comments there. And one thing I changed in our example that I need to change here is I need to make this ISBN so things will be consistent. All right, and here is the results route. So let me get this kind of to the center of the screen. Move this a little bit. Okay. So let's take a look at what happens with results. So results uses a pattern that's very similar to survey. So we define it, we set this local variable error to none. Here is the, we grab the book DAO, and then we do a check. And the check is a little bit different now. So what we're going to look for is we're going to look for, is ISBN in the session? So where did ISBN get in the session? Let's go back for a second and look at the code for survey. So if we have a vote in the request form, that means the user made a vote. Then what we're going to do is we're going to save the ISBN number. Oh, it says vote. Dang, a little bug there. Let's change that to ISBN. Okay, so if ISBN is in the request form, then we're going to save that ISBN number. This is the ISBN number of the radio button of the book that the user selected when they hit submit to submit on the survey page. So if that is in the form, we're going to save it in the session, and then we're going to jump to the results page. All right. Now here's the results page, or we're going to jump to the results controller. So here's the results controller. Bring it up just a little bit higher. So we set up a local variable error. We set it to none. Then we grab the book DAO because we're going to be manipulating books. The thing that results has to do is it has to do two things. It has to record in the data store the vote for the book that was just voted for by the user. And then it also has to display all of the books with the new vote recorded. So the first thing we're going to check is, do we have an ISBN number for a book? That's what this if ISBN number is. So we're saying, is ISBN not in the session? Okay, if it isn't in the session, we have an error. All right, so we're recording that in our error variable. If the ISBN number is in the session, that's great. That means things are working normally. And so what we're going to do is extract the ISBN number from the session. We're going to erase it from the session because we don't need it anymore. And then we're going to call the book DAO and say, hey, book DAO, let's select by ISBN. Here is the ISBN number. So we're going to retrieve a book from the data store, passing in the ISBN number. That book object that we retrieve, we're then going to add one to the number of votes for that book. And then we're going to call the DAO again to update the book. So that's what's happening here. We're saying DAO update book. So that will record the updated book in the DAO. Then we're going to call the DAO again and say, hey DAO, give me all of the books that are in the data store. And we're going to store that in a book list. And then just like we did for the survey HTML page, we're going to call results HTML page. We're going to have that results HTML page render all of the books in HTML so the user can see all the books along with their votes. So that's how the results controller works. The only thing I think I need to explain here is just, not really explain, but just review results.html. So let's take a look at that. So we're going to go in the templates library and look at results.html. And this looks really similar to survey.html. We set up some hard-coded HTML. We display voting results, and we have another one of those sort of like Python for loops that iterates through all the book and books and extracts for each book the title, the author, and the number of votes for the author. We don't need to do anything with ISBN here. because we're not allowing the user to select any books. We're just displaying them. And we don't have to do anything fancy with forms or anything like that either, because we're just displaying the books. So we're putting the books in a list, in an unordered list. All right. There's only one other piece of code that I haven't explained to you yet, and so I want to show that to you, and that is the book DAO. And we'll talk about that next.